Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Nonprofit Show. As the year turned, I reached back out to all of our co hosts and I asked them to come on and kind of give us their forecasts and their trends. And one of my faves of all time, Meico Marquette Whitlock, who I'm very proud to say is one of our co hosts, stepped up and said, yeah, I'll come in and talk about this. And let's kind of dig into this just like we dig in every day with our amazing presenting sponsors, Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Nonprofit Thought Leader, Fundraisers Friday, Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. Meico Marquette Whitlock, Mindful Techie. I am so thrilled you are here today, my friend.
Well, I'm excited to be here, excited to talk with you as always, and excited to be here with the audience as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, and Meico is one of our talented and amazing co-hosts. And so I'm just so excited. Meico is one of those minds. I was telling him in the green room, he is a lovely, soulful human being. I swear you were probably born like this. And you bring a lot of calm and intelligence to our community. And you've written this super interesting book, When Work Doesn't Love You Back, how to thrive and how to look at your world when you might be confronted with some of these issues. And so I just wanted to call that out because I just think it's such an interesting conversation that we don't have enough until it's too late and we get burnt out. So CEO of Mindful Techie and the founder of this amazing man, Meico Marquette Whitlock. Hey, let's talk about these trends. And I love starting off with this. I want to get your feedback. Staff mental health is a must have, not a nice to have. What do you mean by this?
Yeah, so it's a must have. It's not a nice to have. And what I mean by that is we're seeing across sectors, and I see this as a workplace wellbeing strategist working with a whole range of organizations, but particularly in the nonprofit sector, we're seeing there's a growing recognition, number one, that we have a crisis of burnout. Part of that is driven by just persistent understaffing and maybe a lack of competitive compensation. And we know it's well documented that that leads to burnout, right? That leads to high turnover, that leads to high absenteeism, that leads to disengagement from people actually moving the mission forward. And one of the things that we're seeing is many organizations are beginning to understand that it's not just about the annual lunch and learn, that it's not just about the swag bag, that it actually has to, when it comes to caring for our people, go beyond that. It's not just about a separate thing that's separate and apart from your day-to-day work or the mission. Taking care of your people and making sure they're well is the mission, because if they're not taken care of, then they're not going to be sustained in a way that allows you to move your mission forward in a sustainable way.
Yeah, I love this. I think that knowing you as I do, I love that this is how you would launch us on your trends to watch, because this is a value proposition. And this is an approach that I think once you address it, solves a lot of things. Like you mentioned, really that horrible burnout issue. And then we talk about retention. This is where it fits right in. So I love that you say it's not a nice to have, it's a must have. And we need to retool that. The next thing you talk about is flexible work is here to stay.
Yes,
Yay! Okay, what are
absolutely.
you saying about that,
So
Meico?
this is actually tied to the previous point that I just made about the well-being of folks in the workplace, right? And so part of this shift that we're seeing beyond simply the one-time activities is really thinking about how do we redesign work? How do we put in place policies and structures that actually facilitate healthy ways of doing the work? And one of the things that we're seeing for lots of organizations is learning lessons, in large part driven by the COVID-19 pandemic, that allowed us to see that, hey, we can work in new and different ways and still be effective and impactful. And we can carry that forward. And it doesn't have to be a one size fits all approach. It doesn't have to be one way or the other, but rather recognizing that we get to allow folks the flexibility where it makes sense in terms of how the work is designed and how you engage with your community and your stakeholders, allowing folks the opportunity to have more flexibility in terms of how they work, when they work. So long as we have a shared set of priorities and vision for what it is we're working toward, we have a shared set of metrics and accountability for how we move that work forward. It's also an equity issue, right? So for folks that might have disabilities, for example, for folks that might be geographically in a different location, but maybe they're very talented, but they're not able to relocate to a particular area because maybe they have family obligations or some other commitment in a different place. And so it really opens up a range of opportunities. And for organizations that are ready, willing, and able to embrace this, they are at a competitive advantage.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up. And I love that you talked about the diversity of region and skill set and commitment. And shoot, if we keep burning through people, we got to be rethinking how we're looking at things. And I feel like this is just one of those magical things. You know, I look around, Meico, and I don't know about you and your personal life, but it seems to me that when you work from home, you actually you actually are always working, right? You don't just like when you go into an office, it seems like you turn on and you turn off when you leave, right? But when you are kind of in this work from home environment, you it kind of ramps up a little bit. It escalates your engagement. At least maybe it is for me,
Yeah.
versus the decades that I spent going to an office where I literally put on my office hat and persona and I was there. So anyway, I think this is such an interesting thing, and I agree with you. I think it's something that we're going to be discussing because
Mhm.
I think we'll see a separation of organizations, those who embrace it and those who don't.
And one last point I want to make on this is that to your point about your experience with working from home versus working in an office, it's different for every organization. It's different for even individuals inside of an organization or a team. And so when I talk about flexible work, I'm not just talking about moving to a model where organizations are only working remotely or only working hybrid. For some folks, it actually works best for them to be able to actually leave their home space and actually go into the office, right? Maybe you have a lot going on at home, and maybe you actually love going into the office. Maybe that actually worked better for you in terms of being able to interact. Also, depending on where you lean in terms of introvert versus extrovert. So this
Yeah.
flexibility goes both ways. It's not just about saying, oh, everything needs to be remote or hybrid, but it's also it's about what's the right balance for an organization, for a team, for an individual when it
Yeah.
comes to the different options that we have available.
I love that you framed that up because that's probably even just from my comments, that wasn't what I was thinking. I wasn't embracing that. So I really appreciate you explaining what that flexible concept even means or what it can look like, and how you can take a look at everything. Okay, along with that, soft skills mattering more than ever. What is a soft skill and what should we be looking for?
Absolutely. So when we talk about soft skills, when I think about this, essentially we're talking about what it means to actually be human, particularly in the workplace, in such a highly tech-driven, work environment, right? So we know, as we think about this, for example, that there's lots of great things that technology, specifically AI, can do
Mhm.
for us, with us, but it can't replace human connection, right? It can't replace
Yeah.
emotional intelligence. It can't replace the skills that are required to navigate conflict in the workplace. It can't replace what it means to be empathetic of people that might be having different perspectives or might be going through a challenging time in the workplace. It can't
Mhm.
replace all of those things that, as I think about this concept of inner work and outer work. So outer work being sort of the day to day. You're managing the emails, you are attending the meetings, you're moving those projects forward, right? Well, the inner work is about how you're navigating those relationships, right? It's about what
Mm.
does your mental and emotional state look like? How are you actually managing that in response to the things that are popping up? We have to be able to do that alongside the outer work pieces. We have to be able to do that alongside all the wonderful tech tools that we're using. And that becomes even more of an asset and more of a need in the type of sort of workplace that we see evolving.
I love that you framed it up this way because I think sometimes we can sense it, but we can't articulate it. And I love how you just framed that up, because I think you're absolutely right. It's sometimes too, we look at people and we're like, why are they so successful? They're not as smart as I am, but they might have these skill sets that you're just talking about that propels them forward in a different way, that's not intellectual necessarily, right? I mean, but it's a different set of skills.
Absolutely. It's about bringing to bear all of our different types of intelligences, right? So
Mhm. Mhm.
there's the mental intelligence, there's the emotional intelligence, there's the acumen that we actually need in order to actually do the work, the skills that are required to actually perform day-to-day work. All of those things come together. They're not isolated. And so when we bring up those together, we find individually and collectively that we're actually better off in the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, this is going to be one of those things I want to spend a little bit more time on. Authentic and meaningful online and offline connections. What are you seeing here, Miko?
Absolutely. So one, going back to this theme about flexible work, right? And so sort of
Mhm.
how and when we actually do our work. One of the things that we're seeing with successful organizations is that they are something that one of my good friends, Beth Cantor, describes as digitally fluid, right? Meaning
Yep.
that they're able to, and they accept, and they're able to seamlessly navigate in a world where one day something might be in person, another day something might be hybrid, another day something might be completely remote. They're able to navigate that particular aspect of how we connect and how and when we connect. But they're also recognize that the key to making those types of interaction successful isn't about whether it's remote or hybrid or in person or about the particular tool that you're using, as much as it is about how you are nurturing that human to human connection, right? So is it a meaningful connection? Is it an authentic
Mhm.
connection? Is it a deep connection? Is it a an intentional use of the time in bringing folks together, right? A lot of the
Mhm.
pushback that we see when it comes to the different modes of working, particularly for folks that might be resistant to maybe returning to the office, for example. We hear about that a lot.
Mhm.
Part of it has to do with uh, folks feeling like the organizations aren't really valuing their time, right? So if I'm going to spend my time to commute to come into the office, then how can we actually make that work worthwhile? How can we actually make that meaningful and impactful? And that
Mhm.
question in this context is something that for successful organizations, they're asking that and they're answering that, whether it's remote, hybrid, or 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 in person, or as I was talking about earlier, they're sort of embracing this idea of being digitally fluid, being able to
Mhm.
seamlessly move between the different modalities in order to meet whatever the shared goals are.
It's so interesting that you would bring this up. I was recently brought in by one of our sponsors, your part-time controller, to meet with a bunch of their directors. These were, let's see, well, they were mostly women from all over the country who I had never physically met IRL in
Mhm.
real life, but I had been working with them, on the show, email, phone calls, Zoom calls, all that. And when we got together, I found that two things happened. We all spoke about how we looked in real life versus what we thought. And a lot of that had to do with, wow, you're so tall. Wow, you're so petite. Wow, your skin color is this way or that way, or your hair. And then the other thing I noticed, Miko, was that there was no like blah blah blah. I mean, it was like getting down to it. Like the pressure was on to say meaningful things and to pull out from one another more personal things. Does
Mhm.
that ring true to you? It was a fascinating thing to me. I left thinking some of these conversations we had, we wouldn't have had for the first 6 months of working together.
Yeah, so I think we can acknowledge that the different modalities for connecting, hybrid, in person, and remote, are different. There's
Mhm.
no one that's sort of better than the other, the way that I think about this,
Yeah.
but they help us to connect in different ways, and they're
Mhm.
not replacements or substitutes for one another. So what you just talked about
Mhm.
in terms of how you all were able to interact and connect in person, well, that was largely driven by the fact that you are connecting in a different context where you have access to
Mhm.
more cues, you have access to more aspects of someone's just presence when you're
Mhm.
in person, and those are things that you can't get or replace when you're doing it in a hybrid or remote way. That doesn't
Mhm.
mean that hybrid or remote don't have value, but it just means that it's different, right?
Right.
And yeah, so we can
Well,
recognize those things and accept those things and also figure out how to navigate simultaneously.
right. Well, and I have watched with intention since that meeting how we have navigated in a digital world, like
Hmm.
our relationships. And I think they're richer, right? We're
Hmm.
still referring back to meeting one another. We're able to ask deeper questions about families or work environments or think comments that were made, right? And it's just a fascinating thing. And to me, it was a lesson in bias, like how you paint these things in your mind until you meet somebody and break bread with them, right?
Hmm.
You think you know, and then you're like, wow, it was just a fascinating thing, Meico.
I think it's also just a reminder too about how we get to be intentional about that when we're not able to be in person, right?
Yes.
And so that doesn't mean that we can't have meaningful and deep connections in a hybrid or remote way.
Mhm.
But what it means is, given the example that you just gave, it requires us to actually think a bit more about it, because it's not just a matter of plugging in to your internet connection and turning on Zoom. Your culture and how you connect um, in person doesn't just translate itself automatically, right? You have to put in a bit more legwork and intentionality in order to help that transfer over.
I love that you just made that comment because that's been one of my observations is that I've had to work harder. I've had to try to be more mindful with engaging and supporting and not just like we're on Zoom and we got 30 minutes, let's go. I mean, it's a fascinating thing. It's all those going back to your other comment, your soft skills, right?
Yes.
That I think sometimes we felt like we just left behind. Okay, our last trend to watch is AI is no longer a shiny new toy. What?
Yeah. So this is an example of tech just moving at lightning speed,
Yeah.
and I think the organizations that are going to be successful as we move forward in this year and beyond are going to be ones that figure out the appropriate way to adopt it in a mission aligned way. I think the key here is to really be clear about mission alignment, right? Not just using the tools for the sake of using them, but really taking the time with your board, your leadership, with your staff to really be thoughtful about what does your organization stand for? How do you actually go about doing your work and serving your community? And
Mhm.
what are the ways that you can partner with AI to help do that work a bit more effectively? Um, the reality is that in many organizations, your staff are probably already using some of these tools. And so you have an opportunity to really understand um, and learn from your staff about that. You have an opportunity to
Mhm.
put in
Yeah.
place some formal policies and guidelines around, how data is being used, how is it being stored, the appropriate ways to use that technology. And you have an opportunity to um, bring your leadership and your board along as part of that process and not have it be something that's sort of happening in isolated pockets inside of
Mhm.
your organization, but you get to create a sort of a comprehensive approach to that.
Yeah.
And I really love some of the work that Inten is doing. So the
Mhm.
inten.org has released a wealth of resources, templates, thought leadership, courses. All the resources are either free or very low cost for any organization, particularly for nonprofit organizations that are looking for practical step by step. How do I talk with my organization or team about putting in place a strategy? What should actually go into the strategy? What are the ethical things we should be thinking about in terms
Mhm.
of bias and privacy and misinformation and those types of risks? And then what are the actual practical ways that we can use it for
Mhm.
communication, for fundraising, for data analysis? All of those are things that your organization should be thinking about. We're at a place where it's no longer sort of, oh, this is interesting. No, your organization needs to be figuring out, if you haven't already, how you want to incorporate this
Right.
into your workflow and how you go about business.
Well, I love all the things that you said today, and I'm thrilled that we've incorporated you and your amazing mind into our conversation here today at the Nonprofit Show. Meico Marquette Whitlock, founder and CEO of Mindful Techie. And I swear to God, you should be called the soulful techie, because I think you bring this like really interesting layer of humanity to this discussion and these processes that we are struggling with, and that are just an incredible blessing, but sometimes they're not. And so we kind of have to figure all this out. And you're in the center of it, my friend. I'm so delighted that you're part of our team. How to thrive when work doesn't love you back. You can find Meico's book online, and it's really a great tool, I think, for you to understand your organization and your team. And so definitely check this amazing amount of work out. Meico joins us on the Nonprofit Show, and whenever he's on, it's a complete joy. Another great joy we have are our presenting sponsors. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Nonprofit Thought Leader, Fundraisers Friday, Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. These are the folks that join us day in and day out. Hey, Meico, we end each and every episode with this mantra, and it means a lot. It means a lot to me to say it, but even with you, it's even more profound. And it goes like this: to stay well so you can do well. Thanks, Meico.